Greetings all. I was in an online chat room the other day and I introduced myself as blind, a professor, and all the other usual nonsense that comes with shallow online interactions. In addition to its utter failure to capture my best features, that is to say nothing, I found myself having to defend my blindness.
Wait a minute. What do you mean? You know what, guys? Join us as we go through how something like that can happen.
Well, it started with me mentioning that blindness is a spectrum, and my eyesight means that I'm legally blind. I mentioned how people often assume that blind, which includes legally blind, cannot see anything at all. A person trying to defend me said that I was half blind instead of fully blind, while the detractor challenged my claim to blindness entirely.
What was their problem?
Well, said malefactor refused to see me being blind as a spectrum. To them, blindness was all or nothing. I was not allowed to identify as blind, merely visually impaired, or visually limited, or low vision. Being blind, they said, was a title reserved for the totally blind alone. Such that they said my blindness as a spectrum definition was neither medical, nor would it hold up in court. Needless to say, those of us in the chat room laughed pretty hard at this, but we were all genuinely in shock.
What does court have to do with anything?
Exactly, right? But their righteous outrage did have a point. They tried to hide behind a conventional legal definition of total blindness and apply that to all of us who identify as blind. The world needs a lesson, and I'm far from the first to teach it, but nonetheless, you're going to hear it from me. So, strap in, because we're going to get educational up in this house. Indulge me while we talk about the three real definition types for disabilities. It is the medical, the legal, and the social definitions of disability.
Wait, there are three definitions? Aren't they like all the same? I mean, one would think being blind just meant you could only see certain size of a letter at a certain distance at a certain conditions, and that's it. Like, why would you need multiple definitions?
Well, exactly, and I think you summarize the layperson's view quite well there, Tunka. The answer may surprise you. First, let's direct our attention to two sources that demonstrate the multiple definitions of disability and their roles within our lives. I will not be providing a cultural definition of blindness in this video. That said, I hope this video leaves you with the tools to understand the nuanced and many layered condition of how we define others. This also applies to how we define ourselves within RPGs, which I will mention briefly later, but that's really a topic for another video. Alright, so first things here is a text by Sudesh, National and International Approaches to Defining Disability. This is from the Journal of Indian Law Institute from 2008. Of course, citation in the description. Go see it over on JSTOR. Sudesh makes an international examination of countries that have attempted to grapple with the issue of disabled persons in their borders, specifically within their borders. And their essay breaks the definition of disability into categories: religious, charity, medical, social, and disability rights models. The latter three have the largest amount of influence today, focusing on medical identification, rehabilitation, and of course, equal rights. Their essay concludes with the requirements of a legal definition of disability. That is to say that it should be a non-comparative to normal individuals. It should show the positive value of human differences as an emphasis to change society, and it should be free of discrimination. The social and academic definitions and use of disability, both as a physical condition and as a theoretical framework, are really needed to fully understand this topic. As such, Sudesh offers a top-down summary view of different international approaches to both defining and interacting with disability. While Sudesh does not necessarily posit a definition, they state that the definition should be, and I quote, used to show a positive value of human differences, end quote, and thus seeks to create a reparative or positive image of disability and reduce the negative, C229. The models of disability listed by Sudesh affect disabled people in concrete ways, and those effects are brought to the gaming table, of course. Now, my second source that I at least want to cover in brief so this video is not an hour long is by Susan Birch and Michael Rembis from 2014, much more recent. Also, once again, links in the description. It's from Disability Histories. Disability Histories attempts to redefine disability and have a disability recognized as a analytic or interpretive frame, a category, a label, and is a lived experience. And this is done through a 4-part series of essays grouped around shared themes. Part 1 examines how relationships and lived experiences shape our understandings of disability and how these relationships are shaped by public and community practices. Part 2 focuses on cultural histories and draws attention to disability as a concept, in combination with lived experience and analytical framework that intersect, reflect, and contribute to social traditions and beliefs. And Part 3 re-examines the complex relationship between disabled people and medicine, or at least medical power knowledge, reframing disabled people's role during epidemics and the medical sphere. And once again, this can be reassessed in light of COVID as well. COVID proves this point. Part 4 explores the intersections of politics, language, education, and citizenship as a means of disabled people finding their place within a community. Birch and Rembis enable a refocusing of disability away from the medical lens toward a framework. The social, historical, political struggles of disabled people are vital to understanding the role that role-playing games have in our lives. The nature of disabilities change, and disability is not static or ahistorical, as they say. And both the local and global beliefs of those at the gaming table shape how the disabled player is viewed. Once again, see their introduction. The essays in Part 2, their cultural histories, focus on the local and global views of disabled persons in a historical context. The examinations of the intersections of medicine, lived experience, and community discussed in disability histories provide a springboard for examining how, if these influences intersect at the gaming table and change disabled people's lives. Of course, I would argue they do, but your results might vary. But taken together, the definition of disabled has gone through a transition from religious, charity, medical, social, disability rights models to that of Birch and Rembis, where they emphasize the medical versus cultural definitions of the disabled, and particularly their use as a framework and lens with which we may examine and better understand the lives and struggles of those who have disabilities. I redefine these terms as medical, how science and doctors view the disorder, a purely technical definition that strips identity and conveys information, a definition that is largely useless to the average person. There's the legal definition of how the government, and of course how religions, used to define the body as a socio-economic political sense, right? We are a tool, a cog in the machine. And once again, these definitions strip away the human and treat the person with disabilities as an object.
Okay, hang on a minute there. I need an example here. I'm not really following what you're saying.
You want an example? An example. You want
Yes.
proof? All right, well, here's the Gun Control Act from 1968, where the quote-unquote adjudicated as mental defective. And here's it according to a proposal from the Federal Register, the Daily Journal of the United States government. Look it up. This is a hilarious read. We've come a long way in the past almost 60 years. Section 922G of the GCA prohibits certain persons from shipping or transporting any firearm or ammunition in interstate or foreign commerce, possessing a firearm or ammunition in affecting commerce, or receiving a firearm or ammunition that is traveled in interstate or foreign commerce. These prohibitions apply to any person who, 1. has been convicted in court of a crime punishable by imprisonment for a term exceeding 1 year. Okay, fine. 2. is a fugitive from justice. Fine. 3. is an unlawful user of or addicted to any controlled substance. And 4. has been adjudicated as a mental defective or committed to a mental institution. End quote. I'll stop here because the 2014 legislation proposes to change the language, but they propose to change it as follows. This proposed rulemaking would also amend the ATF regulations to clarify the statutory term committed to a mental institution. I would go on and spend an hour breaking down the whole problematic document down, including the fact that they have no problem with the phrase mental defective, but I would be here all day, so I'm going to stop.
Well, all right. I'm picking up what you're putting down. Okay, I see what you're saying.
But I've only just got going. Don't start a war with a blind academic when disability is on the line. Most infamous is committing to a land war in Asia, but only slightly less is not to piss off an academic and attempt to hide behind legal terms and definitions. So, let's turn our attention to my master's thesis and how I define disability. Yes, disability broadly, because there we can define blindness. Now, RPGs are not free from this critique, obviously. For those of you who have not seen my video on Mythic Play and Craig Page, I would recommend watching that, since it continues along this line of thought of this section of my thesis, and we're not going to really go into that here. Let's start with operational definitions. The first question for me was how to define disabled. There's no singular definition that this paper could offer that would be satisfactory. That said, a tentative definition was formed according to the examples by McRuer, Sudesh, Burt, Rembus, and Vandersloot. A successful definition of disabled must include a reclamative language while acknowledging the agency of the disabled. See McRuer. It must be positive, generative, and inclusive. See Sudesh. It should offer resistance to conformity. Burt and Rembus. It should acknowledge disability as a non-singular identity that is imposed and accepted and or rejected, such as by Vandersloot, 2020. It utilizes identity-first language, Remus. Disabled for the purposes of the research connected was defined as the following. And this is true for all of my research to this day, but getting back to my paper. Number 1. A socially constructed identity based on their physical or intellectual ability that is either accepted or rejected by the disabled person. If rejected, the person is considered disabled if they still operate within the community of disabled persons. Number 2, the subject did not need to be labeled/diagnosed by others to define themselves as disabled. This definition, while not perfect, retains the agency of the disabled and is as inclusive as possible.
Okay, I'm picking up what you're putting down here, my man.
So let's get back to blindness. I would define blindness, but let's ignore the field of view requirement for legal blindness and just examine the visual ability test qualification, because I'm not going to bore you with technical terms about field of view and that kind of thing. Let's focus on the one that most people think of. I'm going to quote directly from the American Optometric Association, and I quote, "Under the new criteria, if a person's visual ability is measured with one of the neurocharts and they cannot read any of the letters on the 20/100 line, they will qualify as legally blind based on visual acuity of 20/200 or less. For example, if the person best corrected visual activity for the distance in the better eye was determined to be 20/160 using an ETDRS chart, they would now be classified as legally blind." So, to be clear, there's no definition for legal versus total blindness. You can fuck off. I would define blindness in a far less clinical way. Specifically, I assert the phrase such as, quote unquote, "those of legally blind condition within the aforesaid spectrum identify as blind, legally blind, persons who are blind, etc., fall within the legally blind category." Yet, even then, this is just an external label, an addendum to a cold medical definition that robs the humanity from the humans it represents. The cultural disassociation between legality and legally does not exclude those of us with legal blindness from simply identifying as blind persons.
But blind, no matter where it is on the spectrum, is still blind, right?
Well, let's take a final distinction from Do It. Disabilities, opportunities, internetworking, and technology. Quoting from them, "Legally blind refers to people that have less than 20/200 vision in the better eye or a limited field of vision that is 20 degrees or less at its widest point. Once again, getting back into the field of view definition, but continuing. People who are legally blind may have some useful vision. Let's keep going. Totally blind individuals need braille, raised line drawings, audio recordings, and stroke or other non-visual media as an accommodation for assessing the content of visually presented materials. End quote. Both of these definitions refer to someone that is blind. Not half blind, not partially blind, not almost but not entirely quite blind, almost like they're almost but not entirely quite like tea. The distinction between totally and legally blind is not an identity. So, when those of us who are blind identify as blind, we do not justify ourselves. Nor should I even have to make this video to justify myself. This is an identity, this is not a medical definition. Stop this worthless, pedantic pedagogy and see those of us with disabilities for more than the medical or legal definition. Neither do it nor the American Optometric Association speak for the cultural side of disabilities. They are not positive, generative, nor representative of the human. They're only representative of the condition.
Praise the Lord and pass the ammunition. For more soapbox performances like this, remember to like, share, and subscribe. Whatever happened sure had him foaming this week. Maybe try to show your support in the comments. Sounds like he sure could use it.
Was soll denn den Scheiß, du Arschloch? Was soll denn das? Ich fick dich, du Wichser!